Hello. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining and giving your time for this webinar from Allan Kelly. So, Alan have been here before for another webinar, and I think hopefully last year you guys were, listening to Alan's topics about OKRs, and today he is actually going to talk about the backlog management, which is going to be interesting topic for many of us. It's great, backlog is great, but what happens when your backlogs just basically carry on blowing and become unmanageable? So I'm going to share some of the experience and some of the nuggets for managing this backlog in a different style, or in a way where actually it would be much more enlightening for all of us. I'm interested myself in this topic. So before um, before I actually hand it over to Alan, there are a couple of things. Alan has shared a link with us to gives your feedback at mentimeter.com for a couple of questions. So I have added the link at the beginning of this, and there's also a code. So if you could actually open that link and enter the code, Alan will walk us through that. So over to you, Alan.
Hi everyone. It's rather interactive presentation, at least in the beginning, this one, which means we're all jumping between apps, but hopefully I won't lose anyone. Thank you for having me back, Abby. I think this is becoming a January thing for me and Lithe. It used to be the January webinar I seem to be doing. So, honey, I shrunk the backlog. Before I get stuck into it, I'm going to raffle off the book. So when jump onto your browser, go over to my website, put your name into the book drawer, and at the end, if we have time at the end, I'll draw a book winner. If not, I'll do it tomorrow morning and email you. And there's also an option on there to get the slides. So while I'm talking, just going into the book drawer. Right, shrinking the backlog. Let us have a little bit of audience participation. As Abby said, the Mentimeter link, which is in the chat, if you've not been there, wander over there. And can you tell me, how long will it take to do your backlog? This month, this quarter, this year, or longer still? How long? Just tell me, how long do you think it's going to take to get that backlog done and out of the way? Let's get a few more votes in there. 3 of you. If you've not seen Mentimeter before, it's a great little app for getting instantaneous feedback. There is an app you can put on your phone, but it works perfectly well through the website. Okay.
And would the audience be able to see the feedback? Would you be able to share that on the screen?
I don't know if I can do it through StreamYard. You should be able to see it, folks. When you answer the question, you'll get a holding screen, and then you should be able to see the answer. So right now, 3 of you have answered the question. Come on, some more people. Menti.com 39172202. There you go. 4th person has answered. Let's see. We all. Yeah. 5. I know there's more of you on the call. Let's get the rest of you.
I'll keep the link live as well, because a few people join slightly later as well.
Yeah.
Usually on the 10th to 15 kind of like minute scale.
Everyone finding menti.com okay?
Page not found.
Yeah. Page not found. Oh, on the book drawer on the Menti.
I will just paste the link again here.
Oh, you know what? It's not underscore, it's minus. That's my fault. I've got the URL open in another window. Book minus drawer. That's the one you want. Okay. Right. How are we doing? Okay, so only got 5 of you on Menti. Okay, I was hoping a few more of you'd answer, but it's not essential.
Cool.
Okay, so this is a key thing. When you look at backlogs, very rarely do I find people who say, yeah, the backlog will be done in the next few months. More often than not, the backlog is growing and growing. And And when I say backlog, I'm talking in Scrum terminology. I'm talking specifically about the product backlog, not the sprint backlog. The sprint backlog most definitely should be done this month, if not this sprint. But the product backlog, typically they are much, much longer. And, a quarter, a year, or even more is not unheard of. So much so that I'll ask you, which does your burn down chart look like? Does it look like burn down chart A? Coming down nicely there the way they're supposed to, or are we more like burn down chart B there, where yes, it comes down, but it also tends to jump up and come down and go up, and overall it's more up than it is down. I'm going to wager that most people in this call, you've got a backlog which is probably closer to B than it is to A, and if it is coming down overall, it's coming down rather slowly. So, our backlogs don't do what they're supposed to do in the textbooks. Just a second. Sorry, everyone. This was I just realized, because we're doing this through an app into LinkedIn, I'm losing all my nice animations that I've spent time putting in here. So I apologize, it's not going to be quite as dynamic as I would have liked. So the world is full of good intentions. We should stop global warming. We should feed the world. We should create world peace. And we should do everything in the backlog. That's what you're supposed to do, isn't it? Unfortunately, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And these are all good intentions which can mislead us. We get into this situation where we as product owners, or our product owners, are faced with stakeholders, customers, users, who come along and say, hey, there's a feature I'd really like in your product. And of course we answer and we say, thank you for the idea. Great idea. I'll put it in the backlog. And the person who asks for it is thinking, I wonder how long it is before I'll see this. And, the product owner may well be thinking, hey, that guy will be lucky to get this, be lucky to get it this year. And one of the problems is that the cost of adding a backlog item is pretty near zero. The cost of adding a backlog item is the cost of pulling out an index card in the old days and writing on it, or logging in, going into the right screen on Jira and typing it in. The cost of adding a new backlog item is fairly near zero. But the cost of saying no, first of all, faced with somebody requesting a backlog item and you're saying, no, we're not going to do it, you're going to spend a lot of time explaining to that person why you don't think it's right. And if they don't agree with you, the conversation's going to go on and on. And then if it carries on, they may well end up escalating. They go to your boss and they say, hey, you won't put it in the backlog. It's a simple request. We should have it in there. And before you know where it is, it's costing hours and hours and maybe even thousands of dollars to say, no, we're not going to put something in the backlog. So what tends to happen is we say, yeah, sure, we'll put it in the backlog, but we know it's not going to get there. We know it's going to have trouble fighting through. So 6 months later, our customer comes back to us and say, how are you doing with the backlog item? And the product owner turns around and says, we've not forgotten it, which is true. It's still in the backlog, but it's priorities. It hasn't been prioritized yet. And this starts to lead to a lack of trust. If we're putting items in the backlog and users aren't seeing them come out, if items can't fight to the top of the backlog in 6 months, they probably never will. And our customers don't see them coming out. They just go into the backlog, and that is going to corrode trust. And, to be honest, we're not really being honest. We're not really abiding by our agile values there, which are about honesty and openness and trust and all the rest of it. And if we're just taking backlog items in and putting in the backlog items, and we know that, they aren't going to be able to fight to the top, or we know after a few months that those items are never going to make it, we're not really being honest with our customers. Our teams become like a sponge, and all this stuff goes into the sponge, and the sponge absorbs it, and a little bit drizzles out the other end. And what comes out bears little relationship to what's gone in, and you've no idea the time lag between something going into the sponge and coming out. And that's where our backlogs have kind of got to. Oh, sorry, this one of the comments just distracted me, the 2-minute message. Okay, so, our problem is not having ideas for backlog items. It kind of frustrates me a bit when I hear about people talking about, we need more innovation and all that. And you look at the millions of good ideas in the backlog. Our problem is not thinking of ideas for the backlog. We have two problems. One is delivering the backlog items. Is actually our backlogs are far bigger than we can deliver, and meeting the expectations of our customers and our users. They expect when they put a backlog item in, it will come out. And in some cases, the situation is just getting worse and worse. A few years ago, I was working with an airline, and the team were doing okay. They were started to release regularly, and they were doing dozens, if not 100 story points of an iteration. They all looked good, but the backlog wasn't getting any smaller. And when I sat down and I calculated it, I found the backlog was growing faster than it was declining. We were putting more stories in than we were taking out. It was like having a mortgage where your monthly payments were not covering the interest on your mortgage. So working as hard as you could, you still weren't paying off the mortgage. You still weren't making a difference to the backlog. So our problem's not putting stuff in. Our problem's delivering it. So backlogs really don't scale. Backlogs scale in small. They'll scale for a sprint. They scale for 2 weeks into the future, maybe even 4 weeks or 6 weeks if you're peeking into the next few iterations. But when you've got backlogs of hundreds, if not thousands of items, when you're trying to say, how will your backlog be done in 6 months, 9 months, it kind of breaks down. And backlogs aren't even particularly useful for coordinating teams. You've got two teams that need to work together. They both turn up. They've both got backlogs of several hundred items, and buried in those backlogs are the items the other team need. And for one team to coordinate with another means they've got to disappoint other customers. So in all sorts of ways, backlogs just don't scale. They work well in the small. But I think if we want to think bigger, if we want to think longer term, if we want to go after bigger prizes, we need a mechanism which isn't backlogs. We get into a situation with a backlog that we can't see the wood for the trees. We know there's a vision in there somewhere, but between this myriad of backlog items and the pressure to do backlog, because our success is key to how much backlog we do. We see success as doing all the backlog. We lose sight of the bigger picture. We lose sight of the goals, the objectives, the things that are really important to us. I'd ask you, maybe in the comments section there, maybe some of you can come up with this. Do you know your team's velocity? And I'm sure a whole bunch of you are scrum masters and whatnot, and you know your team's velocity. It's not uncommon with teams that somebody has some kind of a handle on the team velocity. But how many people know the rate of growth? How many people can tell you how fast the backlog is growing, how fast new items are going in there? So really, if we don't have both statistics, we can't really make any stab at forecasting any kind of future dates. We need to know how fast our team is going. We need to know how fast our work requests are coming in. And only then may we start to think about taking a stab of what done may look like. And I say it's entirely possible to get into a situation where you're never going to be done. So if you don't know your team's backlog growth rate, something for you to do tomorrow morning is go and calculate it. Go and find out what it is, because that's a really interesting number. We end up with a situation where backlogs is bottomless pit. Stuff goes in there, but stuff doesn't come out. We just keep on putting it in. Back in the day when I used to manage teams, and as a product manager and product owner, I used to have the cards physically on my desk, and I could just look and see how big the pile was. But in an electronic age where everything is digital, we lose track. It's just numbers. We know there's 500 items. We know there's maybe 1,000 items, but it's fairly meaningless. It's just items just go in. There's no you got an unlimited number of backlog items in Jira. With a physical number of cards, it costs you money to write out new cards. And the situation doesn't get any better. We start practicing dual track Agile or Agile with discovery, where our product people are out there talking to customers, evaluating what's been released and thinking again about what we should be building. And we've got this mechanism now for bringing in even more work. We can bring in even more work, which is better work. But in the process, a lot of our backlog just sits there. It may be that some of the stuff we've discovered discounts work that's already in there. But once the backlog gets to a certain size, we stop looking for the old work. We stop taking stuff out of it. And so often product owners, I was with some product owners yesterday, they have a fear of taking work out. They have a fear that if they take work out of the backlog, they need to explain it to other people. If they explain it to other people in the organization, they've got to justify it to other people. And that is going to take them time. And people are going to be critical. People aren't necessarily going to be happy with the product owner's decision. Unfortunately, a lot of product owners, they don't just lack the time, they lack the authority to really take items out of the backlog. So while we come up with more mechanisms for finding new work and putting work in, we aren't very good at taking it out. And then, I already mentioned my pet subject, OKRs. How do you integrate OKRs in a situation? I have come across, unfortunately, teams who are expected to do everything they were doing last week in the same way they're doing things last week, but are now expected to deliver on OKRs in addition to everything else they were doing. And as you might have heard me say last year, one of the questions you have to think about with OKRs is, do your OKRs derive from your backlog, or does your backlog get built from the OKRs? Are we saying, when we're setting our OKRs, are we crystal ball gazing into our backlog and thinking about the work we want to do in the next few months and writing OKRs to describe that work? Or are we setting OKRs based on business strategy, business priority, our overall goals and objectives? And then, okay, we can select items from the backlog that build towards those goals and objectives, but what if the items aren't in the backlog? Are we going to say, well, we can't do that objective, we can't pursue that goal? More likely, we're going to say, well, let's quickly add it to the backlog and then let's do it. So OKRs become another mechanism for just adding more stuff to the backlog. So again, our backlog grows, no problem. So there's the problem. Let us try a thought experiment. And maybe in the comments here, you can give me some thoughts. What would you do if tomorrow you went into the office and somebody had thrown your backlog away, or you log into Jira and somebody has hacked Atlassian and all the backlog is gone, or Microsoft suddenly get one of those fancy MS bugs and all the user stories are set to the same thing? What would you do tomorrow if your backlog was gone? Come on, let's have some suggestions in the comments channel there. Yeah. Still work, too much project scope, manage it, measure it. Okay. So I don't know whether it's delayed. I'm just wondering what your suggestions are for. I've frozen. Are you still getting me?
Well, it is slightly delayed on the LinkedIn, so
okay.
There'll be comments coming in.
Okay, I'm not frozen. Okay,
okay. You're not frozen. You're fine.
Yeah. So yeah. So well, coverage of okay. When I pose this question, what would you do if your backlog was gone? People usually tell me that immediately it isn't a problem, because immediately the important stuff, the stuff people are crying out for. So it isn't a problem initially that your backlog is gone, because you were working on something, you were working towards something. People see it as an opportunity to, as somebody said, as Matthew said, think about the objective and say, okay, what is it we're really trying to do? What do we need to do to advance on that objective? And yes, people will slowly rebuild their backlog. But
Mhm.
if you were suddenly find your backlog was gone, it's an opportunity to think about what you're really trying to do. What are the real priorities? What we really need here, rather than just churning through backlog. So I don't think losing your backlog is the end of the world. I think if you lose your backlog, it could be a great opportunity. And it's interesting, once or twice when I've done this presentation, people have told me they have had this experience. They have lost a backlog and it's been liberating for them. So my suggestion is nuke your backlog.
Alan, there are more comments as well.
Okay, okay.
Mary says having a tech and product hackathon.
Yeah.
Example. We have one more. It doesn't come as a name, but Rene is saying about checking the customer feedback and follow up on the most pressing issues reported.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. You wouldn't be lost. You wouldn't, if you lost your backlog, you would not sit there wondering what to do. You've got plenty of ideas, and some of those ideas are things you should be doing anyway. Go and think about the objective, go and check the customer feedback and things like that. So losing your backlog's not the end of the world. It could be a good idea. So much so that I'm going to suggest maybe you want to intentionally blow your backlog away. This slide does say nuke your backlog. For this presentation, I've imported the PowerPoint slides into an app, and not only has it removed my animations, but in one or two places it's got the images in the wrong order. So I apologize here. This slide says nuke the backlog. Yeah, if you lose your backlog, don't worry. You have nothing to lose but your burn down charts. And burn down charts are predicated on the assumption that we want to do all the backlog, that doing the backlog is the right thing to do. And that's not necessarily the case. If you think about it, your backlog by definition contains some high value items and some low value items. And if you do all the high value items, then it's a legitimate question: should you be doing the low value items? And if you accept that you aren't going to do the low value items, then using burn down charts and getting to zero work to do, you immediately realize it's not a good measurement of success. So I'm going to suggest you nuke your backlog and you start over and you think about life without a product backlog. And there's one company I want to call out here, which I think is a great example. And I'm sure their teams do use backlogs. I'm sure their teams use product backlogs, but there's another part of their ethos which fits in really well here. Amazon. And I may have used this example last year when I talked about OKRs. Jeff Bezos has long promoted what he calls a day one mentality at Amazon. The idea that every day at Amazon is the first day of a new startup. It just so happens that as the years go by, that startup has more and more resources. It has an immense website, it has immense logistics, it has a marketplace and all the rest of it. But a startup, if any of you have ever been in a startup or any of you have worked for yourself like I've done, one of the things you regularly are asking yourself is, what am I selling to my customers? What do my customers want? What will my customers exchange money for here? You have to come back to the customer centric view. What do our customers, our users want from us? And you have to baseline with that. And that's what Jeff Bezos is talking about when he talks about day one at Amazon. He said, don't be beholden to the fact that you've done half of a project or you've spent $1 million on something. Constantly put the customer first. And if you realize you spent $1 million and done half a project and it's not going to satisfy the customer, then don't feel you need to continue it. But when you see the opportunities, when you see what the customer wants, be driven by the customer and what the customer sees as valuable, which really is an approach we could use without a backlog. We can start to say, we haven't got a backlog. We're not just drawing items out of the backlog to do. We're constantly saying to ourselves, what do our customers want? So the way I imagine it is we've got our company exists for a purpose, to benefit society, to do good things. The graphic in this slide has really been messed up. I'll come to it in a moment. So our company, our organization has what I call level 1 goals. It's our overall purpose. It's the reason we exist. And within that purpose, we may have we will have at least one or more missions there. The things the company is doing. And the example I always think of is a pharmaceutical company. It exists to create medicine to help people live healthy lives. And in the beginning, it may only have one mission, one drug to create. But over time, with success, they create a number of drugs. They've got multiple missions going on. Missions and purpose tend to last a long time. Purpose in particular, may last the entire life of a company. It's the thing that keeps the company going. And we have our missions, which last a long time. And then every 3 months, we want to look again at our goals, our level 3 goals, or we want to reset them. We want to throw away any backlog we've got. We want to go back to basics. We want to go back to day one. We want to reassert our missions. We want to think, what is it we're really trying to do here? What are our objectives? And we could use OKRs for this, we could use product goals for this, we could use outcome oriented thinking, whatever mechanism it is. But we do want to write it down, and we do want to get our team to agree that we're all heading in the same direction. But periodically, we wipe the slate clean and we rethink what we're trying to do. Now, if your team is where you want your team to be, if your team is really effective, if your team is delivering customer value, if everyone is happy with their customers, everyone's happy with your team, then actually doing this probably doesn't make any difference, because you're in a beautiful place already and you wipe it all away and you reset. And yes, it takes you 2 or 3 days, but you find that you end up resetting to the same place you were. On the other hand, if you're not delighting customers, if you are a bit off track, then resetting is an opportunity to reset, to really think about what you're going to do and what the objectives are and what the value add is and all the rest of it. So reset every few months. And OKRs for me is the obvious way of doing it, but you choose your mechanism. That graphic there, what you're seeing is yellow and greens and blues. That should be a nice spinny type wheel that goes round and round. But okay. So what I want you to do is I want you to replace your backlog with a machine, a just-in-time story generator. And into that machine go things like your purpose, your mission, your OKRs, your product goals, jobs to be done, whatever technique your company, your team, your organization is using, they form your story generator. And every time you need to decide, what work shall we do now? What work shall we do next? You crank up the story generator, you crank the handle, and you use it to generate some stories to move you forward on your goal, on your mission. So we don't stockpile stories. We just have a machine that generates stories as we need. Yeah. And it may be that sometimes some stories last a few weeks, but stories shouldn't be lasting for months and years. We have a just-in-time story generator. And to do this, we have a pattern. We start off setting our goals. We think wide, we think extensively, we have big, deep conversations with the team, with our customers, with the users. We come up with some goals. And, hopefully that only takes a day or two, maybe a bit longer, but, it's a small amount of time. And then we go into a narrow execution phase and we really blink ourselves and we really try and execute against those goals. After we've done that, and that's the longest period, the narrow phase is the longest period. At the end of that, we review where we've got to. We see, have we moved forward against our goals? Have we delivered the benefits we expected to deliver? Are we adding value for our customers, for our stakeholders? So we go wide thinking, narrow execution, wide thinking, and then loop straight round again. So think of it like this: you've got your sprints, but you've got this super cycle over the sprints. Every few weeks, you are resetting. You're resetting your story generating machine. And every sprint, you're using your story generating machine to generate the work to do. Now, it's a super cycle. You call it a super sprint if you want. All the old rules apply. We start and we end, we close out, we have retrospectives, we think about goals, all that kind of stuff. It's just a super cycle. And then within our sprints look pretty much like our sprints always did look. Although again, this app has changed the text sizing on my things. Your sprints look the same as they ever did, but instead of going and cherry picking your backlog, you're using your story generating machine to generate the stories you need to drive forward on your goals and your objectives. It may be that you need to have a pre-planning meeting to flush out all that work from your story generating machine and then have a classic planning meeting, or it could be that's all in one planning meeting. Your sprints don't change very much. The important thing is your stories are fresh, your stories are generated as you need them to move towards your goals. This making sense? I hope so. The other thing we need to bring back is reach back into the past and bring back time boxing. We want to move away from an approach where we're saying, how long will it take to do all this work? How long will it take to do this story? How long will it take to do this backlog? And we say, we are working in sprints and we are working in a super cycle. The question is, to move forward on these goals, these objectives, what can we do this week, this sprint, this quarter, in the time we have available? What can we do? We try not to have too much pre-planning. We're going to try and live more in the moment, but we're not going to let ourselves run and run and run. We want to be able to do stuff and stop. So instead of saying, how long will it take? Say, what can we do that will advance us? We are not trying to build the perfect thing. We're not trying to build the perfect product, the perfect system, the perfect railway, the perfect app. I damn well hope you're doing really first class code and you've got all the quality procedures in there so you don't get to the end and get tripped up by defects. But in terms of the product itself, we accept we'll never do everything we want to. It'll never be quite as smooth, quite as shiny, quite as feature laden as perhaps we'd love it, but we can, in the next few weeks, advances against our goals. We can make a difference. And excuse me, if after we've done one super cycle and we've advanced on our goals, if at a later date we decide, we need to do more work on that, then of course we can do more work on it. But we're not going to just keep trying to gold plate, add more stuff, add more features, all of that. We just want to say, what can we do in the time we have? Not how long will it take? So, how are we doing? Okay. So really what we're getting here is saying we want to lead with our goals. We think about our goals and we let our work follow our goals. And our goals will follow our strategy and our missions and our purpose. Too often in our backlog-driven development, our backlogs are to the fore and our backlogs are leading our work. And because the backlogs are leading our work, we lose sight of these bigger things. And I got to put my hand up and plead guilty here. I have advocated small stories all through my career, and I think small user stories are brilliant. Small stories flow through the system and they start delivering value more quickly, and they help to reduce problems in the delivery pipelines and all the rest of it. But by definition, small stories don't show you the big goals and the big objectives. And the problem is our backlogs have led us to get too bogged down in our backlogs and not our goals and objectives. I'm actually starting to call this way of thinking objective-driven agile. So I will write some more about it, but this is what I think is objective-driven agile. We put our objectives first, and we work back and say, in the time we have, what can we do to advance against our objectives? So objective-driven agile, ODA, and with that, hopefully we can drop out a lot of the processes that we've got into and burning a lot of time. Okay. Before my last couple of slides, I'm going to give you a commercial break. I did mention OKRs before, and next month I'm going to do a couple of online OKR mini workshops, 20th and 27th next month. So they're a bit of an experiment for me. So I'm running short workshops, low prices, limited number of tickets. If you want to go across to allankelly.net/services, and the code think15 will give you 15% off. I'd love to see you there. Give it a go. I say more details on my website there. So, oh no, you can't see this slide. Psychologists have an expression called transient objects. And parents, you know transient objects, you know comfort blankets. Transient objects are the things that children use as they move from childhood into a more mature adult state. Cuddly toys are the obvious example. They're what a child uses for comfort, to feel safe. As they get used to not being around mum and dad all the time, they'll grab that trusted toy and hug it tight. These are objects that are very important to children, but they grow out of, and they use these objects to move forward in their own development. They're transient objects. And I'm going to suggest backlogs for us are a transient object. Backlogs, in the early days of Agile, backlogs made a lot of sense because backlogs allowed us to go from the traditional requirements-driven view of the world with our big requirements documents. Backlogs allowed us to take that requirement document, project model, all of that, and to do something that was quite similar. We could drive it from the backlog, which looked a bit like a requirements document, and we could deliver things people wanted. But let me suggest that it's time to let go of childish things. We need to move beyond backlogs. There are better ways of doing this. So think about it. Let's see what we can do. I know what I've just said for some people is really, really radical. And yes, when I say nuke to backlog, it is, you don't get much more more radical than that. So you don't need to make the jump in one big go. You can start talking about goals and outcomes. You can start to change your own conversation. Rather than constantly talking about backlogs, try and pull it back to bigger goals and objectives. Talk about that with your stakeholders. Start to set a quarterly outcome cadence, a quarterly goal cadence. Again, using OKRs or some other mechanism. Try and set that with your team and say, right, this quarter, what are we shooting for? And by the way, I'm not advocating a return here to quarterly software releases. I think it's absolutely brilliant that we can now do continuous delivery and delivery many times a day. Last thing I want to do is move back to quarterly or annual releases. I just think we need to think more about our goals, and we need to think about our goals over a longer period, so we can pursue our goals and we can incrementally improve what we've got, the products we've got. We can start to put our backlog in the back seat. We can start to lead with those goals and objectives that we're chasing, and let the backlogs follow. Just leave the backlog there. Don't spend a lot of time on it. Go fishing in it. Take stuff out of it. Develop it. But if it's not in the backlog, don't worry. Do it anyway. And of course, celebrate when you meet your goals, when you show you've delivered against an objective, when you've delivered more than 10 stories, when you've delivered something more meaningful. So I think there's a gentle path here, but I want you to imagine the end goal. So there we are. Goals over backlog. I'm sure it's going to be in the Agile Manifesto at some stage. Objective-driven Agile. You have nothing to lose but your burn down charts. Thank you. I think we can take a few questions. Abby, I was just wondering where you got to.
I love the idea of objective-driven backlogs. Yeah, ODA. Agile.
Go have a
Uh,
TLA.
there were some discussions while you were having go through your slides and everything.
Yeah.
One of the things that we were just mulling over, like, is it anywhere, like somebody has seen anywhere that the stories are all the way connected to the objectives in the organizations, all the way to the C-level objectives, and have anybody experienced the connection throughout how it is actually traversing? And this is an open question to everybody as well, but
Mhm.
also, what is it that actually stops currently?
It's definitely desirable, but you're right. Something stops it. Is
That
it people don't like? Is it back to my point about we don't like saying no? It's a really good idea for a product, but it doesn't directly contribute to the vision, to the
mm,
goal.
one of the things, Alan, I noticed that working with product owners, and if you ask them, hey, why can't you remove something from the backlog? One is, of course, is like there is nothing to lose. Why not?
Mhm.
Just have it there. But second thing that you mentioned as well is they need to answer somebody. Is the fear
Mm.
of losing it. Maybe that was a great idea, or maybe that information is there. There is no consequence of having that long backlog. It's literally like having like
Yes,
two item of 100 things, and you know that you're not going to finish them today or even next few days. Why not just have it there?
but well, more is more. People like to have all that stuff in, like have every single suggestion for changing it, and what we miss is that that has a cost. The fact that we keep all those things in there makes it difficult to focus on our real objectives. Because if you've got 5 trivial stories in there for everyone that contributes to the objective,
Yeah,
um, you can't see. You spend all your time wading through pointless stories, and it's it's difficult to say to those people, I'm not going to do it. So you leave it in there. Um, and if I'm being honest, I think an awful lot of product owners don't feel as if they have the authority to remove things from the backlog.
that's so true. Actually, it's the authority as well that they
Yeah.
need to think about, because they need to go and ask somebody, is that okay if I remove this from the backlog? That itself actually fundamentally breaking the first limit of the role, right?
Yes. Yes. I, my, I I sometimes feel as if a lot of product owners I meet would be better termed backlog administrators. They're
Mhm.
allowed to put things into the backlog, preferably things other people have thought of, and they kind of shuffle them and they take a few out each sprint plan and they put them in, and they may mark them as done, but they don't
Mm.
actually do a lot to whittle them down or to focus
Mm.
the team.
I was just having a conversation
Yeah.
just this earlier this morning about having the product owner at various levels, whether they are tribe level or team levels,
Hmm.
just having this like their thoughts put together on the Excel sheet or whatever tools they're using sometimes doesn't feel connected because there is no clear line of
Yeah.
sight towards the objectives. And then the leaders, sometimes it's become very chaotic for them to even figure out, make sense of that whole work. Like, why are we doing this? And that question not getting asked enough.
Yeah. There's an interesting comment there. Someone said, until a team works together, I find they need a backlog for transparency. I know where you're coming from. At the same time, I feel as if the backlog detracts from transparency because the backlog becomes the product owner's thing to manage. And we do talk about the product owner being responsible for managing and prioritizing the backlog. But it's like the product owner's over there doing that. And if they try and involve the team may complain about the amount of time it takes. But often by breaking it apart, you actually lose transparency. Product owner is doing backlog, team are
Mm.
doing stuff, and the backlog becomes a distraction. It obscures what's actually happening. Coming back and saying, okay, this is our objective. Let's all rub our noses in the objective. We can't avoid it. So
Mm.
I feel where that user's coming from. I know I've been there, but at the same time, I think it's more transparent not to have a backlog, specifically when it comes to stuff in the backlog which is never going to get done, but you don't
Mm.
tell the customer that.
Alan, you mentioned that the authority part of the product owners, right? And many product owners actually don't feel that they have authority.
Yeah.
So if we ask them a question saying, "Who is the backlog owner?" What do you think their answer will be then? Who is
Yeah.
the backlog
You
owner?
know, I think the backlog owner is often an absentee landlord. The person who probably owns the backlog on paper a lot of the time is somebody who doesn't have the time to look at the backlog, to do the maintenance on the backlog. They
Mhm.
they own it on paper. I can imagine that you've got a product owner and the actual backlog owner is 2 or 3 levels above them, but that person above them, they know they own a backlog down there, but they've never looked at it. They've never examined the quality of it. And when people say, we need just some refinements on the backlog, they're like, well, you can do what you like, but I haven't got time for that.
Mhm.
It's one of those contradictions in Scrum, in that what Scrum asks for the product owner is somebody who's really got serious authority. But quite often, the people who have the serious authority don't have the time or the skills to engage with the teams doing the work. And so our product owner ends up being this proxy in between.
Yeah, didn't you hear about the proxy product owner role in many places? It's
Yes. Yeah.
it's so much used that it's effectively becoming official role at some point.
I think it can be useful. And I came across this case just recently where there'd been an ERP project and the HR department was really cheesed off that the
Mm.
ERP team had delivered all the features that finance wanted and none of the ones that HR wanted, because the product owner had been a representative from finance.
Ah,
And in that kind of scenario, I would actually look for a business analyst to be a proxy product owner, because one of the things business analysts are trained to do is to recognize different stakeholders.
yeah.
And I think they would have said, okay, finance are really important. HR are really important.
Mm.
We can satisfy some of the people all the time, or all the people some of the time, but we have to find a way through this.
Yeah.
And I think in that case, actually, a proxy product owner would have been a good solution. But I agree. So often we put these powerless backlog administrators in there and say,
Mm.
do whatever Scrum says with the backlog.
Very interesting. By the way, there's a question on the screen. How's well, just before that, actually, there is a relevant being a proxy PO in my first experience of Agile. Okay. There's a question about how's a goal translated into work items. Also, how's priority of a work item determined in this context under ORA?
Yeah. So you go into your planning meeting and you look at your goal and you say, given where we are today, given the product we have, the systems we have, resources we have, given the time we have, what can we do to advance on this goal? Not what can we do to do the goal completely, because that might be a multi-year project, but what can we do today which will move us from where we are towards that goal? What does that look like? Does that look like some new code changes? Does it look like some user training? Does it look like some shared material? What do we need to do? And that's the question to keep coming back to. And I think when you have an engaged team, there's not usually a problem answering that. People are full of ideas. Uh, it may be a problem if you've got a team who you've trained not to say anything. It may be a problem if you've got a team in a faraway location who you don't like, and you don't like them answering back. But I very rarely struggle with teams to get ideas out of them.
On the relevant one, Sajad just posted a question saying, Alan, from a different lens, if there is collaboration between PO and developers and SM, would backlog hinder transparency?
It would certainly hinder transparency to customers if the customers don't know that some of those backlog items in there are going to take years to do. If you're just putting backlog items in there and you're not saying to the customer, by the way, the average time it takes to do an item at the moment is 8 months. So you're not going to get transparency on the customer side automatically. On the team side, I don't know. I mean, I'm not. So what's missing from that question for me is, where's the team? Are the team engaged with the backlog, or are the PO and the product owner and the Scrum Master always interfacing to the backlog on behalf of the team? So I don't think a PO and a Scrum Master would automatically resolve the transparency issue for the team, and I certainly don't think they'd resolve it for the customers.
Interesting. Are there any more comments or questions?
Somebody's put there about managing competing priorities. I mean, that's always a killer, isn't it? But you get that in backlogs as well. I would like to think that when you think about, when you're setting objectives and goals at a quarterly level, that is a time to have serious conversations about priorities. Because when you're setting objectives for the next quarter, you cannot have 10 objectives. You need to limit it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Please don't go any more. And you're going to have to say no to things. You're going to have to say, we won't do something. We won't do this over that. And I think one of the problems I see with organizations today is they don't accept those trade-offs. They tend to say yes to everything. And what you end up with is you've salami sliced the team. The team and the people doing the work are trying to do a little bit of everything. As a result, you're moving forward, if you are moving forward, very slowly on multiple fronts. And that is a super inefficient way of working. And I'd like to think that if we talk more at the goal and the objective level, we can have a richer conversation with our organizations, and we can talk more strategically, and we can say, look, if we try and do a bit of both of these, they're both going to happen slowly, and it's always going to be a compromise. Let us face up to the fact we should do one thing and not another. So to the question there, hopefully it'll make the conflicts more obvious, and hopefully you can deal with them.
Mary's also asking a question about, how does Scale Agile align with ODA thinking?
So which scaled Agile? I'm going to assume you mean SAFe, and I know SAFe is adding OKRs, and I honestly don't know in detail about any method. I'm not an expert in any of the scaled methods. I always observe on these occasions that SAFe may or may not be an Agile method, but it certainly isn't a lightweight method. I would like to say, the way I would imagine it working is not that we are ensuring that every objective and every goal is perfectly aligned when we set them, because I don't think we can. By definition, if you're in a scaled environment, you've got many teams. And if we're practicing Agile and we are trusting teams and we're pushing authority down to teams, and then it's a fact of life that teams are going to sometimes set objectives and goals which aren't aligned. And if we try and put in place some kind of system to police the objectives and goals that people are setting and don't let them set them, then we're going to rob ourselves of our autonomy and our empowerment and self-organization. But once you've got those goals, once you've got those objectives, and since every team's only going to have like 2, 3, 4, maybe at most, and you've got a clear statement of company mission and strategy, it should be fairly trivial to look at the goals for a team and say, do these goals contribute to that strategy? Do they move us forward?
Yeah.
So maybe we can't do it in advance, but we can certainly do it as the time goes on. And sometimes teams are going to say, yeah, this team is out of tune because we're doing something different. It doesn't apply to us, or it's a long-term. But you'll have a rationale, and teams should be able to explain themselves. And I think, if autonomy and self-organization mean anything, it means people are trusted to sometimes make mistakes.
It's amazing. As much as I would like to carry on this conversation, it's always interesting along with you and all the audience questions. I didn't realize, actually, I just noticed the clock. It was 5 o'clock already. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining today with Allan here.
Yep.
And hope to you having wish you all good luck to win Allan's book as well. We have participants from not only UK, Allan, remember, so there are people coming from
Yes.
US, from Europe as well. So we have US, UK, and America.
I'm happy to post the book anywhere in the world. Although the UK post office has had a cyber attack and can't take overseas mail this week.
Cool. Thank you so much, everybody. And hope to see you for next webinar. And have a good evening.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.